Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over Tropical Storm Henri, which is currently just south of Bermuda, but it is expected to be moving further to the north, and eventually will be moving into eastern New England and generally into the northeast region. So we're going to be talking about its track, what it could possibly be doing, and what's causing it to move in that direction. If you're worried about tropical or Hurricane Grace, then skip forward to the end of the video. That's when we cover Hurricane Grace, but the majority of today's video is going to be centered around Tropical Storm Henri and the effects that that storm could have. So starting off today, you can see that we have our National Weather Service page. We have some red flag warnings in effect for Northern California, a few air quality alerts scattered throughout the West, as well as some flood watches for parts of Utah, Colorado, and some parts of New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine as well. We have some heat advisories that's along parts of Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and into Texas. And then all those kind of red patches that you see are tropical storm warnings and hurricane warnings down in the Atlantic. Yesterday in Stovepipe Wells, California, we had the high temperature of 109 degrees, low temperature of 29 degrees in Bodie, California. We had the highest rainfall report, 9.1 inches in Brevard, North Carolina, and there are no snowfall reports as of yesterday, but we're actually going to start to see our first rocky snowfall of the year in parts of the northern Rockies. For parts of Wyoming and Colorado and Utah, we're actually going to see some high elevation snow this weekend. So finally, the snow season is somewhat getting a start, and we'll probably have some snowfall reports up over the next few days. So here's a look at what the 5-day outlook looks like. You can see that we don't have anything brewing out east of the Atlantic, so we don't have any areas that we're watching right now, but I'm going to talk about in just a minute or so how we could possibly see something developing out there over the next couple of days. We have Hurricane Grace, Category 1 Hurricane Grace, which is into the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. And then we have also Tropical Storm Henri, which is just to the southwest of Bermuda. This is expected again to move up into the eastern New England area. We also have ex-Tropical Storm Fred, which is going to actually play a big role into what happens with Tropical Storm Henri. So taking a look at the tropical outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, you can see that they are expecting some tropical development from the 18th through the 24th. So this map was made yesterday, but they are expecting in that red shaded area potentially some more tropical development over the next 6 or 7 days. So we do still need to watch the tropics even after Tropical Storm Henri and also tropical or Hurricane Grace move through. So once all of those storms move through, we potentially still have a couple more that we want to keep our eye on. So looking at Tropical Storm Henri, you can see that it's located at 29.5 degrees north by 69.5 degrees west, maximum winds of 70 miles per hour, so that's up 5 from yesterday. Minimum pressure of 995 millibars, moving west at 9 miles per hour, 4 miles per hour lower than that Category 1 status. So it's basically a weak hurricane by this point. I would not be surprised later today, maybe tomorrow, they upgrade this to a hurricane, because you have very warm waters in through this entire area, and even the areas that are below that 80-degree threshold into the Delmarva, into parts of the northeast and the coastal waters there, you're still a good 5 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in terms of the sea surface temperatures. So even if it is cooler than normal, it's definitely warmer. Even if it is cooler than those areas further to the south, it is definitely warmer than what you would normally see this time of year. Taking a look at the key messages, we have two for Henri. We have the first one saying Henri is forecast to be near the northeast coast of the U.S. late this week and early next week, and the risk of storm surge, wind, and rain impacts in portions of the northeastern U.S. and Atlantic Canada remains a distinct possibility. Interest in these areas should closely follow the progress of Henri. The second one says swells from Henri will begin to reach much of the east coast of the U.S. and Atlantic Canada by the end of the week and continue through the weekend. weekend, these swells could cause life-threatening surf and rip currents. And this is not just going to be for areas that are in the Northeast or even in the Mid-Atlantic. These are going to be all the way down the coast. So you're going to be basically from Georgia all the way up the coast into New England and Atlantic Canada. You're probably not going to want to go on the beaches at least for another 2 or 3 days, because rip currents are really high throughout all these areas. So we are dealing with a ton of rip currents and also some coastal flooding, probably from some of the storm surge that's expected in parts of southeastern New England. So even if you live all the way down in the Carolinas or Georgia and you want to go down to the beach, just be a little bit careful, because Henri is bringing up some swells and is also bringing in some rip currents, which could be deadly depending on how strong they are. Taking a look at the path of the storm, according to the National Hurricane Center, it's expected to stay as a tropical storm until tomorrow early in the morning, and then by Friday and into Saturday, it's expected to be a hurricane. So this is the strongest point. It will go into cooler waters, still warmer than normal, but cooler waters into this area, and that should weaken it just a little bit. It is still a tropical storm by this point, so you're still looking at winds maybe gusting up near 50 or 60 miles per hour. And that would be by Monday. So the main time for impact, if you live along the New England coast right around this area, the main time for impact would be Sunday night into Monday morning. And then it's going to stall out here. So from Monday morning to Tuesday morning, it's moving maybe 50 to 100 miles to the east. So really moving very slowly by that point. You would expect it to stay fairly similar and move into the Atlantic Canada region. So you're going into areas like Nova Scotia and into eastern Canada. And those areas would be dealing with their impact probably by Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. Taking a look at the track guidance, the models are actually fairly close now. So we were looking at just yesterday, the models being pretty much all over the place. We were dealing with some models being all the way out here and other models being all the way out here. So we had a fairly wide spread yesterday. Luckily, we're kind of moving in on a specific location. It looks like somewhere from eastern Long Island to just east of Cape Cod is going to be where we're going to be dealing with the main impact. And then all of these models, for the most part, have this staying over that area, then tilting to the east, and then eventually moving pretty much eastward, or even maybe even east-northeast into the Atlantic Canada region. So we're going to have to see what happens back there, but it looks like this will probably stall out, maybe bringing in a little bit more rainfall, so that could be an issue with this. Taking a look at the GFS ensemble models, you can see these are a little bit further west than the regular models. The colors on the screen indicate the strength of this. The reds are the reds indicating the strongest, and you can see that strongest time period is going to be when it's offshore of the Carolinas, Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. Once it gets to the waters from New Jersey and northward, it's going to start to weaken a little bit, but it is still fairly strong, even though it's in those cooler waters. Looking at the water temperatures, you can see that anywhere basically above this line right here is too cold for to really sustain a hurricane. So that's the 26°C benchmark. That's 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and usually you want to see your temperatures, your sea surface temperatures, be above that to sustain at least a hurricane. Usually you want them to be a little bit higher than that, 81, 82, 83 degrees, but you can sustain it with 79 or 80 degrees. These waters up into New England, the coastal Northeast, just a little bit too cold by about 4 or 5 degrees for sustaining those these hurricanes. So you're dealing with water temperatures in Fahrenheit that are between about 60 all the way into parts of central New England, even up into the 50s and 40s as you got up into Maine. But you're dealing with, mainly for this area right here, dealing with sea surface temperatures between 60 and 75 degrees. So that's not warm enough to sustain a hurricane, but you can probably sustain a tropical storm for a few days under those water temperatures. Looking at the model guidance for the intensity, you can see that this is the point where it's offshore of the Carolinas. So that's when it's going to be at its strongest over the next 2 to 3 days. That's when it could be a Category 1, or even some models bring this up near Category 2 status. Definitely, it is a possibility. But most of the models, as it goes into those cooler shelf waters of the Northeast, that's when it starts to dip down back into that tropical storm status. Still a fairly strong tropical storm, even as it's nearing the Cape Cod area. looking at the most likely arrival time of these tropical storm winds, you can see that for the most part, when it's going to be impacting New England and southern New England, that'll be right around Sunday morning, and then that's when you're going to start to first see the tropical storm force winds. Probably the bulk of it will be Sunday afternoon and evening, even into Monday morning. Still, that could be a possibility. As you're getting up into Atlantic Canada, the Gulf of Maine, those areas will be dealing with those tropical storm force winds possibly arriving around Sunday night into Monday morning, and you can see the probabilities of tropical storm force winds. I like to use that light green shade as an area, the light green or the yellow shade as an area where you're likely to see those tropical storm force winds. So you can see that that yellow area extends for these areas right here. So most likely southeastern New England, maybe if even pushing up into coastal Maine and even into southern Nova Scotia, could be dealing with a bit of tropical storm force winds. And I usually like to use that yellow line to signify where that's going to be. Usually the National Hurricane Center is a little bit on the lower side of things in terms of the actual wind speeds on these types of maps. Taking a look at the total rainfall from this is from the next 5 days. So this is not just from Tropical Storm Henri, but you can see that we're expecting, especially over this area, this is mostly from Henri in southeastern New England. That's where we're looking at about 2 to 5 inches of rainfall in isolated spots. Areas more inland, that's somewhat due to ex-tropical storm Fred, which moved through there. And it's still raining in some of these areas and still producing rain in some of those areas, but that's mostly a side effect of that, plus some of the impacts from Henri. If we look at the upper air setup, this is one of the things that I think a lot of people are neglecting. Not too many people are talking about this. They're just talking about that they're saying, oh, one model is shifting a little bit further to the west, one model shifting it to the east, one model has this making landfall in Long Island, the other model has it going all the way out to sea, and mostly just model watching instead of actually figuring out what's happening in the atmosphere. But what we're seeing is that at the 500 HPA level, which is about 8,000, 9,000 feet up, you're dealing with a low pressure and a big trough dipping into the Carolinas, Virginia, also into West Virginia as well. So that general region is where we have a big upper level trough dipping down. You can also see that we have Henri, which is down here. It's a fairly wrapped up storm. Now, because Henri is strong, it will be able to kind of move away from that trough a little bit, so it's going to curve out. The stronger the storm, the more likely it curves out. If it's a weaker storm, it can probably get looped in and move somewhat closer to the mid-Atlantic. But even if it is a weaker storm, again, that's going to mean it's not going to have as many impacts. So I would say most likely that we're going to see this storm kind of curve a little bit further to the west, and then eventually it'll kind of lose its grip on it and move out further to the northeast. Again, most likely a landing spot for this would be right in here. This trough is just kind of bringing this in. So what we're dealing with is this trough spinning around like this, and now we're dealing with this storm having to move around there. We also have a big high pressure, which is to the north. And you can't see it on this map, but we have ex-tropical storm Fred, which is back over here. So this is providing a bit of a stream of moisture, which is going to connect tropical storm Henri and ex-tropical storm Fred. This storm is going to move to the north. It will be far enough away from this trough that it will be able to dive out a little bit further to the east. What was happening yesterday, the reason that some of these models had this going way further to the west into New York City or New Jersey, was because you had the upper low pressure trough a little bit stronger, and it was also a little bit closer to the storm. Now we're dealing with this a little bit further away, and that has a big impact on the track. So now we're dealing with this going a little bit further to the east. It's complex, but it is important to understand because this is what's really creating the pattern for this storm to develop. Just because you're looking at the surface plot on the models, on the GFS model or the European model, those are all driving from what's happening in the upper air, and that's way more important to look at than the surface plot or the track of some of the models, because those are going to change every day. But what really isn't going to change is this general upper air setup, and then you can drive your forecast based off of that. taking a look at some of the models, we looked at the upper air setups. Now we're going to look at where some individual models are bringing it, because even though we know that upper air setup, we have many models that bring this over different areas. It has narrowed down. So yesterday we were dealing with the GFS bringing this all the way back here. We had some models like the European model, which had this all the way down here. Finally, some of these models are starting to agree. So I'll plot them all with this marker tool here. We have the GFS, which plotted it right here. Then we look at the Canadian or the European model, and you can see that it has it mostly right here. You can see the maximum winds are to the east, but the maximum winds would be on the northeast side. So we would be looking at the storm a little bit further west of that max area of winds. So that's where the European model has it. If we look at where the Icon model, the German model, has it, it's right down here. And you can see that most of those models, and I'll go back here, you can see that most of the models were within a few miles of each other. So we're now starting to get to the point where we have a little bit more certainty on what exactly is happening. So that's good. We finally have some good consistency. So if you're interested in a Category 1 Hurricane Grace, we're not going to start talking about it. It's located at 20.1 degrees north by 87.9 degrees west, maximum winds of 75 miles per hour, minimum pressure of 989 millibars, moving west at 17 miles per hour right now. So that's the satellite imagery of it. You can see that it's located right now over the Yucatan Peninsula, and it'll be moving back over into the lower Gulf of Mexico, where it'll be making landfall in eastern Mexico. If we look at the key messages, you can see the first one says, for Grace, that hurricane conditions and a dangerous storm surge are expected in portions of the hurricane warning area in the eastern Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico during the next several hours. Preparations to protect life and property should be rushed to completion. Second one says there is an increasing risk of hurricane conditions and dangerous storm surge in portions of the eastern mainland of Mexico beginning late Friday, and a hurricane watch is in effect for part of this area. And finally, through the weekend, heavy rainfall across central and northern portions of the Yucatan Peninsula and Veracruz State should lead to flash flooding and flash and urban flooding. In addition, the heavy rainfall from Grace will be capable of producing mudslides in Veracruz. So bad situation in southern New Mexico. Really not too good, especially with all the rainfall. You do have some higher terrain over these areas, so if you get a lot of rainfall, it can create some mudslides. Taking a look at the current watches and warnings from Hurricane Grace, you can see that we have tropical storm watches in western Cuba, and then we also have a little bit for some parts of eastern and central Mexico. So that's over a tiny area. The bulk of that area is under a hurricane watch, and then we have tropical storm warnings in that blue color, which covers much of the Yucatan Peninsula. And then in that red, that's where we have a hurricane warning. That's where we're currently dealing with either high-end tropical storm force winds or even hurricane force winds. You can see that we have the tropical storm force winds in that orange area, and then I don't know if you guys can pick that out, but you can see that little brown dot right in there. That's where we're dealing with hurricane force winds. It's over a small area, but over that isolated area, we are dealing with really, really strong winds. And then you can see the past track of the storm. You can see it was pretty much moving straight west-northwest. It did not make any big loops or turns. It was a fairly straight and forward track. Looking at the forecasted cone track of this, you can see that it's expected to weaken to a tropical storm on land over the next couple of hours. By tomorrow afternoon, it's expected to become a hurricane again for a brief time, possibly a Category 1, before it does make landfall again with eastern and east central Mexico. Then eventually it'll become a tropical storm, then back to a tropical depression, and if it holds up and moves back into the Pacific, it could become another storm. What happens if this were to move into the Pacific and stay as a tropical storm is that you would be looking, for example, on the National Hurricane Center page for the Eastern Pacific, and you would still see that it says Hurricane Grace. They changed this year, so now last year, if this happened last year, and they actually made a whole new name in the Pacific hurricane season for that storm. Now what they're going to do is that they're going to keep the name, so you're going to still see Hurricane Grace, and they're not going to add that on to the Eastern Pacific totals. So a little bit different if you were curious on what they would do if this does cross back over Mexico and move into the Pacific. Looking at the chances of tropical storm force winds, it's pretty much a guarantee over this entire area. I would say if you're even in that orange or golden color, above 50% chance, that's pretty much a set in stone fact that you'll probably be dealing with some tropical storm force winds. It does extend a little bit further out where you still could be dealing with, even inland, some of those tropical storm force winds. And if you're looking at hurricane winds, probably going to be over in the eastern Yucatan Peninsula, and then also over this tiny area of east central Mexico as well, where hurricane conditions are possible and present. Those are the areas where we have those hurricane watches and hurricane warnings currently in place. So that wraps it up for today's video. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. I answer pretty much all of your comments if you have a question. Also, please consider leaving a like on the video, subscribing, and turning on notifications, because I do upload daily, and we'll have a ton more updates on both of these storms for you guys. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.